If you ever played video games in the 80s and the 90s, or Pac-Man, or connected your piano keyboard to your PC, or recorded music in a studio, you know what MIDI is, and you have our next guest to thank, but not for that. He won't take credit for that.
No.
The father of MIDI, ladies and gentlemen, Dave Smith, doesn't want anything to do with that MIDI.
No.
Let's actually set this up by saying that I just played a MIDI, and I'll play some more MIDI. This is the MIDI that most computer users are used to, is this kind of MIDI, where it's music on their computer or maybe on their cell phone nowadays.
Yeah,
it sounds kind of cheesy.
Kind of. Yeah.
That's not what you invented.
No, this is general MIDI, and that was kind of a secondary thing that came out a few years after MIDI first came out, and that just enabled people to be able to play one MIDI file on different instruments.
Right. What is MIDI from your point of view?
MIDI was originally developed by the electronic music companies that make synthesizers to enable you to connect different instruments together.
So they could talk together?
Yeah, basically you could hit a key on one and it'll play the other one at the same time.
That's what it stands for, Musical Instrument Digital Interface.
That's
it's pretty simple. Invented in 1983.
That's when it was first shipped.
You were at a company called Sequential Circuits.
Right.
Which musicians will know immediately. In fact, when you said it, my eyes lit up because, of course, the Prophet was the prototypical polyphonic synthesizer, the first one.
Right.
That people were really making music. People like Pink Floyd and Yes, and they were playing that.
All those guys.
All those guys. So you're standing there, you've got the Prophet, and what was the problem that you were trying to solve in 1983?
Well, when the Prophet first came out in 1978, it was the first instrument that had a microprocessor in it. The first musical. Yeah.
What was in it?
It was a Z80 with a whopping 2 kilobytes of memory in it.
Were you aware of this at the time? When I mean, this is roughly around when you're starting Apple.
And yeah, I was kind of associated with some other music companies doing it a different way on the Apple.
Oh, really? What were you doing?
Just hardware boards that could plug in and play different instruments under software that was in the computer, but it wasn't generalized where you could connect to different keyboards and different players. It was one specific keyboard that was sold with it.
Well, that was the problem with the
was
Prophet,
the problem.
with the Apple.
Sequential had its own interface because once we had microprocessors in the instruments, it was easy to connect them to other instruments. Right. So Korg had one interface, Roland had one, Yamaha had one.
Alpha Centauri had one.
Everybody had their own, but they wouldn't talk to each other.
Right.
Well, obviously the industry wasn't going to go anywhere with that sort of a situation. So we got smart and decided we'd come up with something new, common that everybody would use, so that everybody would talk to everybody else.
Did you license it, or?
No, it was done. It was done by 4 companies, my company Sequential and 4 Japanese companies. And once we were finished with it, we gave it away to everybody because we wanted to make sure everybody used it.
Now you know what's cool? MIDI 1.0 still the standard. They didn't ever needed a 1.1 or a 2.0. That's pretty amazing.
It's still at 1.0.
It hasn't changed
after 20 years.
That's pretty. I can't think of any other protocol.
Not many things last that long.
No.
The HP12C calculator.
That's about it.
That's
5 years.
So this was basically like Ethernet is a way of interfacing hardware together so it could talk. Ethernet and TCP/IP. Are you the hardware? Is MIDI the hardware layer, the software layer?
It's both actually. It originally decided.
It's a physical way,
a
physical way of connecting.
And,
so that's a MIDI connector right there. In fact, let's turn this so people can see it. And this would be a DIN connector in this case?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's the physical layer.
Exactly. And then basically the software part, the serial interface on it defines, hit this note this hard at this time with this sound, that sort of thing.
What are the parameters in MIDI? You say what the instrument is?
You can, or you can not.
You can not?
You have the choice, because you could change the sounds differently if you want to.
Do you say the volume?
The volume, how hard you hit the note, basically.
Okay. So that's not
velocity.
Attack? Or it's called velocity. Okay.
Right.
And then obviously what pitch and so forth.
What pitch. And then you could also send the controllers, like if I turn this up and down, that information can be sent, and then that can do different things in different instruments.
So it's a pretty flexible protocol.
There's a lot of things you can do with it.
And nobody's kind of added on to it since then?
Oh, there have been additions. There's stuff for controlling lighting in shows and so forth.
They use MIDI for lighting?
Yes. You can synchronize all your lighting with your music. You can send files back and forth now. There's a lot of different things it does.
It's not the best file transfer system, though. How fast is MIDI?
It's only 31 kilobaud, which is very slow these days.
That's 31,000 bits per second?
Yes. But that's enough for when you're playing 1 or 2 keyboards and controlling just a couple synthesizers. That does just fine. Right. If you have bigger systems, you use multiple MIDI cables to get around that problem.
So MIDI is not the synthesizer.
No.
MIDI's not this sound or this particular kind of funky thing. It's a way of talking. It's just it's a protocol.
Yes.
Now you're back to making hardware synthesizers. Tell me about this. This is Dave Smith's Instruments, the Evolver.
This is a new product for me. Like I like to say these days, for musical instruments, software is the future, but hardware is more fun.
Would you agree with that? You're a hardware guy, Waz.
Well, I would. But hardware now is inside of chips, and it's not as much fun as it was when they passed out schematics with TVs. You know,
there's less soldering these days. Maybe.
Well, everything's so tiny now, you can't build it yourself anymore. You have to have a company outside build it for you because everything's too small.
Is there a lot of VLSI in here? A lot of
yeah, and there's a lot of real tiny surface mount parts and
right.
So
that's kind of the neat thing. You're a company of one, really, and you outsource the fab and all of that stuff.
It's an interesting experiment company-wide to have a hardware company that has no infrastructure. I work out of the house. There's no employees. I just design products when I want to, and then have somebody else take care of shipping them for me and building them.
Some of Waz's employees are here saying, don't tell him anything. Don't give him
any ideas.
Don't give him any ideas at all. Waz was saying that if this had been invented 20 years ago, there would have been war would have ended. But show us what this thing can do.
Well, it can play by itself.
So is it a sequencer?
It has a sequencer in it, so I can...
so that's what we're hearing now is a sequence.
Exactly. And you can go through and change parameters however you want while it's playing back.
So it's kind of a sound design tool.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can make it as crazy as you want, or as you can go any direction you want easily as it's playing, and it'll remember different sounds.
Have you ever done that, Waz? Played with sound design, make different sounds and stuff like that? It's kind of fun. But basically, I think you'd be very good at it because it all comes from how the electronics are interacting, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're just controlling parameters.
You could say I might be really good at drawing pictures and painting too.
Doesn't make you a Michelangelo. I understand. So when you're designing a sound, how many parameters are there?
In this particular case, there are 128 different parameters to play with.
Things like envelope attack, effects that you put on it, frequency,
filters, all those sort of things.
And that can all be combined in different ways to make different sounds.
Right. And then when you get something you like, you press a button so you can save it and have it next time you get it.
Can you then upload it using MIDI to an instrument?
Yeah. In fact, you could even get, we have computer editors. So if you really, really want to work on a computer, you can see all the parameters on the screen and use your mouse to drag them.
Do people ever do it with waveforms and look at the waveforms, or is that too granular?
Not quite to that level.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Control this thing with this. I want to hear you.
Well,
use
that's the nice thing.
The Dave Smith Instruments Evolver with a keyboard.
You can use it with a keyboard or without. Yeah. And if I use it with the keyboard, I can.
It reminds me of Kraftwerk. I think we're going back in time. I love synthesizer music. I always have. And, of course, it's never gone away now. Once it was invented, it changed the face of music forever, and it's used everywhere.
Pretty accurate. It's there even when you don't know it's there. It's
exactly.
There.
Even violin string sections now.
Sure.
String sections
it's an inexpensive way to do soundtracks, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
And, of course, the synthesizer companies have gotten in trouble for that in the past.
Well, a few musicians are mad.
Yeah. But others are happy.
Right. There's a couple of guys, drummers, going, they've been using that same sample for 40 years. DaveSmithInstruments.com is the website, not quite 40 years. Dave is, it's kind of fun for me to be able to get to meet people like Waz and Dave Smith, people who have really changed the face of technology and really added to our ability to be creative, because that's what it's all about ultimately.
Sure.
It's not about the dials, the buttons, the pots, the chips. It's about what you do with it.
Creating musical instruments.
Really great.
Great to meet guys like this that are actually still doing it.
Isn't it good? You're still doing it? What are you talking about? We'll talk about Wheels of Zeus a little bit later on if you'll tell me anything.
Yeah, not too much.
He's so secretive. For links to download MIDI versions of movie and TV theme songs, Dave Smith won't like it, but you can do it. And your favorite bands like AC/DC, Schindler's List, and Baywatch. Read the article at screensavers.com. But just remember, Dave did nothing to encourage that. Even though it says you have Dave to thank in my copy. Thank you. We do thank you, Dave Smith.
Thank you.
This, for more, DaveSmithInstruments.com is the website to learn more about the Evolver.